Have you ever felt that your life has been delayed while everyone else seems to be moving ahead? Have you ever looked around and wondered why some doors open effortlessly for others while your prayers seem to echo back in silence? Maybe you've worked hard. Maybe you've stayed faithful. Maybe you've carried burdens that nobody knows about. And yet, deep inside, there's a question you rarely say out loud. God, have you forgotten me? If that question has ever crossed your mind, then stay with me, because what I'm about to share may completely change the way you see your current struggle. Imagine a young man standing alone in a dry field. The ground beneath him is cracked. The harvest he prayed for never came. His savings are gone. His friends have moved away. Every morning he wakes up carrying the same disappointment, and every night he falls asleep wondering if tomorrow will be any different. From the outside, it looks like failure, but heaven sees something entirely different. What if I told you that some of God's greatest gifts arrive disguised as delays? What if the season you're trying to escape is actually preparing you for something far greater than you can currently understand? Most people think inheritance is something you receive after someone dies, but God's inheritance is different. It's a future prepared before you ever arrived. It's a purpose written before your first breath. It's a blessing designed specifically for your life. And the most remarkable part? It doesn't disappear because of your mistakes. It doesn't vanish because of your setbacks. And it doesn't expire because you've waited too long. Right now, there is someone listening who feels exhausted. You've been carrying responsibilities that seem heavier every year. You smile when people ask how you're doing, but deep inside, you're fighting battles that nobody can see. You keep showing up. You keep believing. But sometimes your faith feels like a candle trying to survive a storm. And perhaps that's exactly why this message found you today. Because God often speaks most clearly to those who feel most forgotten. Think about Joseph. Before he ruled a kingdom, he sat in a prison cell. Before people honored him, they betrayed him. Before his dreams came true, everything in his life seemed to fall apart. If someone had looked at Joseph's circumstances, they would have assumed his story was over. But God wasn't finished. The prison wasn't his destination, it was preparation. The betrayal wasn't the end, it was part of the path. And maybe, just maybe, the chapter you're living right now is not the conclusion you feared. Maybe it's preparation. Maybe every closed door is protecting you from a smaller future. Maybe every delay is creating room for something bigger. The truth is, we often judge our lives by what we can currently see. God judges our lives by what He has already planned, and there is a huge difference between those two perspectives. A child looking at a seed sees nothing special. A farmer sees a future harvest. A person looking at a storm sees destruction. God sees growth. A person looking at a waiting season sees emptiness. God sees preparation. That's why faith isn't believing that everything makes sense today. Faith is trusting that God sees tomorrow more clearly than we see this moment. There was a woman who spent years praying for change. Every morning she prayed. Every night she prayed. Month after month, year after year, she asked God for the same breakthrough. Nothing happened. At least, that's what she thought. What she couldn't see was that during those years, God wasn't only preparing the blessing, He was preparing her. Her character became stronger, her wisdom became deeper, her compassion grew greater. The person who finally received the blessing was not the person who originally asked for it. And that's how God often works. He prepares the gift, but first, He prepares the person who will carry it. Many people want the promise. Few people embrace the process. Yet the process is where transformation happens. It's where hidden strength is developed. It's where trust is tested. It's where faith becomes real. And perhaps this is why you're listening right now. Not because your journey is ending, but because God wants you to understand something before the next chapter begins.
You are not waiting by accident. You are not forgotten, you are not overlooked, and you are certainly not abandoned. There is an inheritance with your name on it. Not necessarily money, not necessarily fame, but purpose, peace, direction, impact, blessings that reach beyond what you can currently imagine. The challenge is that most people quit emotionally just before they arrive at the season they've been praying for. They stop believing, they stop expecting, they stop looking forward. And that's exactly what the enemy wants, because hopeless people rarely recognize opportunities when they appear. But something tells me that your story is different. Something tells me that despite the disappointment, despite the waiting, despite the unanswered questions, there is still a small part of your heart that believes God has more for you. Hold on to that belief, protect it, nurture it, because in the next part of this journey, we are going to uncover why some blessings seem delayed, what hidden battles take place before destiny is revealed, and how God often positions ordinary people for extraordinary breakthroughs when they least expect it. Your current chapter is not the final chapter. In fact, the most surprising part of your story may be closer than you think.
There is a reason why God doesn't reveal the entire journey at once. If He showed you every obstacle, every delay, every sleepless night, and every battle waiting ahead, you might never take the first step. So instead, He gives you enough light for today and enough grace for tomorrow. The problem is that most people mistake God's silence for God's absence. When the prayers aren't answered immediately, they assume heaven isn't listening. When opportunities disappear, they assume God has closed His hand. When life becomes difficult, they assume they have somehow fallen behind His plan. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very struggle you're trying to escape is evidence that God is actively working behind the scenes? A few years ago, there was a man who dreamed of building a better life for his family. He worked harder than anyone around him. He sacrificed weekends, he stayed late, he carried responsibilities that would have crushed many people. Yet every opportunity seemed to collapse at the last moment. Job applications were rejected, business ideas failed, relationships became strained. The more he pushed forward, the more resistance he encountered. Eventually, frustration turned into disappointment, and disappointment slowly became doubt. One evening, sitting alone in his car after another difficult day, he whispered a question that countless people have asked throughout history. God, why is everything so hard? What he didn't realize was that God was not withholding his future. God was building him for it. Because sometimes the blessing you're praying for requires a version of you that doesn't exist yet. Think about that for a moment. The person capable of handling the next level of responsibility, the person capable of carrying greater influence, the person capable of stewarding greater blessings may not be the person you are today. And that's not criticism, it's preparation. Every challenge develops something. Every disappointment teaches something. Every season of waiting strengthens something. Nothing is wasted in God's hands, absolutely nothing. The tears you cried when nobody was watching, the prayers you prayed when your faith felt weak, the moments when you kept moving forward even though you wanted to quit. God sees all of it, and more importantly, He uses all of it. There is a hidden process that takes place before every significant breakthrough. Before David wore a crown, he faced giants. Before Moses led a nation, he wandered through a wilderness. Before Esther influenced a kingdom, she endured seasons of uncertainty. The preparation always comes before the promotion. Yet most people focus only on the promotion. They celebrate the visible victory while overlooking the invisible preparation that made it possible. What if the season you're currently experiencing is your preparation season? What if the obstacles are developing strength you will desperately need later? What if God is teaching you lessons now that will protect you from failures in the future? The truth is, blessings without preparation often become burdens. Success without character can destroy people.
Influence without wisdom can mislead people. Resources without maturity can overwhelm people. That's why God cares more about who you're becoming than what you're receiving, because who you become determines what you can sustain. Right now, there are things happening that you cannot see. Doors are moving, opportunities are forming, connections are being arranged, circumstances are shifting. And while you may not recognize it today, heaven is orchestrating details that will make sense later. This is where faith becomes difficult. Not when everything is going well, not when prayers are being answered, not when blessings are obvious. Faith becomes difficult when nothing seems to be changing, when the waiting stretches longer than expected, when the answers don't arrive, when the future feels uncertain. That's where many people stop trusting. But that's also where the greatest spiritual growth occurs. Because real faith is not built during comfort, it is built during uncertainty. Anyone can trust God when the path is clear. It takes a different level of faith to trust Him when the road disappears into darkness. Imagine walking through a forest at night, carrying only a small lantern. The light doesn't reveal the entire journey. It only reveals the next few steps. Yet those few steps are enough, and then the next few become visible, and then the next. That's how God often guides His people, not with complete explanations, but with daily direction. One step at a time, one day at a time, one act of faith at a time. Maybe that's exactly what you need to hear today. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to have every answer. You don't need to understand every delay. You simply need enough faith to take the next step. Because the inheritance God has prepared for you is not lost. The promise has not disappeared. The plan has not been canceled, and the timing has not been forgotten. In fact, there are moments when God seems slow only because He is arranging something far greater than what you originally requested. What feels like a setback may actually be protection. What feels like a closed door may actually be redirection. What feels like a delay may actually be divine alignment. The challenge is that we rarely recognize these things while they are happening. We understand them later, much later. And that brings us to a powerful question. If God is preparing something extraordinary, then what exactly is standing between you and the blessing He has already prepared? Why do some people reach their destiny while others abandon the journey too soon? And what hidden battle takes place inside the heart before a person steps into the purpose God designed for them? The answer may surprise you, because the greatest obstacle is often not around you, it's within you. And that is where the next part of this story begins.
The greatest battles in life are rarely the ones people can see. They aren't fought with weapons. They aren't fought in public. They aren't fought on stages or in front of crowds. The most important battles happen quietly, deep inside the human heart. Because before God changes your circumstances, He often changes your mindset. Before He transforms your future, He transforms the way you think. And before He leads you into your inheritance, He confronts the fears that could keep you from receiving it. There was once a man who had spent years praying for a breakthrough. He had survived disappointment after disappointment. Every setback left a scar. Every unanswered prayer added another layer of frustration. Over time, something began to happen that he didn't notice at first. He stopped expecting good things. His faith didn't disappear completely, but his expectations did. He still prayed, yet deep down he no longer believed anything would change. And that's what prolonged disappointment often does. It convinces people to lower their expectations, to stop dreaming, to stop hoping, to stop believing that God still has something extraordinary ahead. The enemy understands something that many people overlook. If he cannot destroy your purpose, he will try to destroy your expectation. Because a person who expects nothing eventually pursues nothing. A person who believes nothing is possible eventually stops moving forward. And a person who loses hope often walks away from opportunities that God places directly in front of them.
This is why protecting your faith is so important, not because faith magically removes every problem, but because faith keeps your heart open to what God is doing. The truth is, many blessings arrive quietly. They don't always come with dramatic signs. Sometimes they arrive disguised as small opportunities, unexpected conversations, new relationships, simple decisions, ordinary moments that appear insignificant at first. Yet those moments can completely change the direction of a person's life. The challenge is that hopeless people often overlook them. Imagine standing in front of a massive locked gate. For years you've prayed for it to open. You stare at the gate every day. You focus on the gate every day. You become obsessed with the gate. Meanwhile, God quietly opens a smaller door nearby. But because you're focused on what didn't happen, you fail to see what did. How many people miss God's provision because it arrives differently than expected? How many people miss their opportunity because they become attached to a specific outcome? Sometimes God answers prayers, sometimes He exceeds them, but often He does it in ways we never anticipated. This requires trust, real trust, the kind of trust that says, even if I don't understand what you're doing, I believe you're still working. That's not easy, especially after seasons of pain, especially after betrayal, especially after loss. Pain has a way of making people build walls around their hearts, walls designed to prevent future disappointment, walls designed to avoid future hurt, walls designed to protect fragile emotions. But those same walls can also block future blessings, because when you close your heart to disappointment, you may accidentally close it to hope as well. And hope is essential. Hope is what keeps people moving forward when evidence is scarce. Hope is what allows people to endure difficult seasons. Hope is what enables people to trust God's promises even when circumstances seem to contradict them. There is something powerful about a person who refuses to surrender hope, not because life is easy, not because everything is perfect, but because they understand that God is bigger than what they currently see. Right now, someone listening feels tired. You've carried burdens for so long that exhaustion feels normal. You've faced challenges for so long that struggle feels familiar. And perhaps you've begun wondering whether things will ever change. If that's you, listen carefully. Your current situation is not your permanent identity. Your struggle is not your destiny. Your delay is not your final destination. The chapter you're living right now does not define the entire story. In fact, many of God's greatest works begin in seasons that appear hopeless. When Abraham looked at his circumstances, the promise seemed impossible. When Joseph sat in prison, his dream seemed impossible. When David faced Goliath, victory seemed impossible. Again and again throughout history, God demonstrated a pattern. He specializes in situations that appear impossible. Why? Because impossible situations reveal His power in ways comfortable situations never could. But there is another truth many people miss. God's greatest obstacle is often not the situation, it's the fear inside the person. Fear whispers dangerous lies. It says you're too late. It says you're not qualified. It says you failed too many times. It says you'll never recover. It says nothing will ever change. And if repeated long enough, those lies begin to sound like facts. Yet fear has always been a poor prophet, because fear predicts futures that rarely happen. Fear magnifies obstacles while minimizing possibilities. Fear focuses on limitations while ignoring God's power. And many people spend years trapped by fears that never become reality. That's why courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite it. It's choosing faith over fear, trust over doubt, hope over despair. The people who step into their inheritance aren't necessarily the most talented. They aren't always the strongest. They aren't always the smartest. Often they are simply the people who refuse to quit. The people who keep believing. The people who keep trusting. The people who keep moving forward one step at a time. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now, standing between fear and faith, standing between doubt and trust. standing between your current reality and the future God has prepared. The decision you make in this season matters more than you realize, because there is one final lesson that every person must learn before they fully step into God's prepared inheritance. A lesson about timing, a lesson about surrender, a lesson about why God's plan often unfolds differently than human expectations. And once you understand this final truth, you'll never view delays, disappointments, or waiting seasons the same way again. Because what seems like the end of the road may actually be the moment everything is finally about to begin.
There comes a moment in every journey when a person realizes that God was working all along, not just during the victories, not just during the breakthroughs, not just during the moments when everything finally made sense, but during the waiting, during the uncertainty, during the nights filled with questions, during the seasons when nothing seemed to be moving. And perhaps that's where your story is right now. As you've listened to this message, maybe you've seen pieces of your own life reflected in it. Maybe you've remembered prayers that still haven't been answered, dreams that still haven't become reality, promises that still feel far away. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, you've begun to wonder if God is doing something bigger than you imagined. The truth is, one of the hardest lessons in life is understanding God's timing, because human beings naturally want immediate answers. We want clear directions. We want quick solutions. We want certainty. But God often works differently. He sees the entire picture while we only see a single moment. He sees the destination while we're focused on the road. He sees the future while we are overwhelmed by the present. Imagine watching a master artist paint a masterpiece. If you only looked at a small corner of the canvas, the brush strokes might seem random. Some colors would appear out of place. Some lines would make no sense. You might even think mistakes were being made. But the artist sees the complete picture. Every brush stroke has purpose. Every color has meaning. Every detail contributes to the final masterpiece. Your life is much the same way. Right now, there may be pieces that don't make sense, experiences you wish had never happened, disappointments you still carry, losses that left permanent marks on your heart, questions that remain unanswered. But God sees the entire canvas, and one day, what feels confusing now may become one of the clearest examples of His faithfulness. Many people spend years asking God for answers, but sometimes the greater miracle is not receiving an answer, it's developing trust without one. Because trust transforms a person. Trust creates peace during uncertainty. Trust creates strength during weakness. Trust creates hope when circumstances offer none. And trust allows people to keep moving forward even when they cannot see the outcome. Think about the moments in your life that shaped you most. Chances are they weren't the easiest moments. They weren't the most comfortable moments. They weren't the moments when everything went exactly according to plan. Often, the seasons that shaped us most were the seasons we would never have chosen. Because struggle develops endurance, waiting develops patience, challenges develop character, and faith grows strongest when it is tested. Looking back, many people eventually realize something surprising. The very seasons they once wanted to escape became the seasons that prepared them for everything that followed. The delay protected them. The closed door redirected them. The setback strengthened them. The struggle refined them. And the waiting prepared them. Maybe that's true for you right now. Maybe the thing you've been fighting against is actually preparing you. Maybe the season you've been questioning is actually positioning you. Maybe the delay you've been frustrated by is actually protecting something far greater than you currently understand. The inheritance God prepares is not merely about possessions, it's about purpose. It's about becoming the person He created you to be. It's about discovering a peace that circumstances cannot steal. It's about finding strength that doesn't depend on temporary success. It's about walking confidently, even when the path ahead remains unclear. And here's what many people never realize. The inheritance was never something you had to earn through perfection.
Because none of us are perfect. All of us make mistakes. All of us fall short. All of us experience moments of doubt, fear, and weakness. Yet God's grace remains. His promises remain. His purpose remains. And His love remains. That's why your failures do not define your future. Your mistakes do not cancel your destiny. Your setbacks do not eliminate God's plan. The chapter you're in today is important, but it is not the entire story. There are still pages left to write. There are still blessings left to discover. There are still miracles left to witness. There are still opportunities waiting around corners you cannot yet see. And there are still reasons to hope. If you've been carrying disappointment, release it to God. If you've been carrying fear, release it to God. If you've been carrying anxiety about the future, release it to God. Because the future does not belong to fear. It belongs to the one who already stands at the end of the journey, the one who knows every detail, the one who never abandons His people, the one who continues working even when His work remains invisible. So today, choose faith, choose hope, choose trust, not because life is easy, not because every question has been answered, but because God has proven throughout history that He is faithful, and faithfulness never goes out of style. Before we finish, I want you to do something. Take a moment and think about the biggest challenge you're facing right now, the burden you've been carrying, the prayer you've been praying, the answer you've been waiting for. Now remember this simple truth. Your story is not over. God is still writing, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after the hardest pages. If this message touched your heart, encouraged your spirit, or reminded you that God is still working in your life, make sure to support God Message Global by subscribing to the channel. When you subscribe, you're not just joining a community, you become part of a family of believers who choose faith over fear, hope over despair, and God's promises over life's uncertainties. Also, take a moment to like this video. A simple like helps this message reach someone who may be struggling right now, someone who desperately needs encouragement, someone who needs a reminder that they are not forgotten. And don't keep this message to yourself. Share it with a friend, a family member, a coworker, or anyone who may need hope today. You never know whose life could be changed by a single message arriving at exactly the right moment. Thank you for spending this time with God Message Global. Until next time, keep trusting, keep believing, keep praying, and keep walking forward. Because the inheritance God has prepared for you is closer than you think.